How does having one versus two copies of the APOE4 variant, so APOE is a gene, you can have different numbers. You get a 2, a 3, or 4 from mom, a 2, a 3, or 4 variant from dad. So you can be an APOE2 or 2-3, a 3-3, a 3-4, or an APOE4-4, which has the highest, confers the highest amount of risk. How does having one or two copies of this APOE4 variant impact chances of getting Alzheimer's? So my family is littered with APOE4, but also APOE2s. We have so many APOE24s in my family. It is bizarre. So APOE4, one single copy increases risk to me a little bit, but I don't really know what that means, because if a person with one copy of the APOE4 variant also has an APOE2, the 2 neutralizes most of the 4, and it kind of doesn't bother me as long as the person is living a healthy lifestyle. Really important. If you have an APOE3/4, I believe that most, provocative comment, most of the APOE4 induced risk that increases Alzheimer's risk in a person with one copy of E4 plus an APOE3, like you, Max, that you've been very open to talk about, I believe that at least 60, 70, 80% or more of that APOE4 increased risk can be neutralized or negated by lifestyle changes. People with one copy of the APOE4 variant, you don't want to drink alcohol in excess. You don't want to smoke tobacco. You want to follow a Mediterranean style diet. You want to get your cholesterol in check. You want to make sure your blood pressure, your blood sugar are really perfect. Those metabolic risk factors plus APOE4. Bad news. Head trauma. We don't want too much head trauma with APOE4 either. You want to have sufficient omega-3 fatty acids in the diet. And if you can't get it in fatty fish, then you can possibly take a supplement. There are so many things a person can do to make their genes work better for them. So when I read a news story that says, oh, having one copy of the APOE4 variant increases your risk by 2 to 3 or 3 to 5 times, that doesn't mean anything. That's silly math, because if a person's healthy and doing everything right, maybe it increases risk by like 0.2. So it's like by 20%, like, big deal. So to me, one copy of APOE4, I don't want to say it's meaningless, but you can do something better and make your genes work better for you. If you have two copies of APOE4, it still kind of doesn't bother me. Like, yes, 1% or ish of the population have two copies, two variants. Sure,
Yeah.
it increases risk. I don't think it's 12-fold or 14-fold. There was one study that showed 8-fold. Again, how do you make those two copies of APOE4/4 work better for you? You don't drink alcohol in excess. I tell my APOE4/4s minimize alcohol. There's no amount of alcohol, in my opinion, that's good if you have two copies of E4/4 on the brain. Vitamin D, got to make sure your vitamin D levels are adequate. Again, omega-3 fatty acids. Please, please, please eat fish at least twice a week and take omega-3 supplements if your blood level's low. Now, this is really confusing. Our goal in our work is to try to make things less confusing. So we actually created software. We did an NIH-funded clinical research study called Retain Your Brain, a randomized controlled trial, 988 people enrolled, and we showed that people that use this software, it's free software, can reduce their risk of Alzheimer's by 6% in just 6 months. And that was amazing. Software from the comfort of your own cell phone. This software teaches you about APOE. It teaches you about what to do if you have an APOE4 variant. It teaches you what to do if you have this risk factor or that factor. So if people are listening and you're like, oh my gosh, what is all this stuff? APOE, first of all, I don't know if I have it, and what do I need to do about it? Well, if you want to know if you have it, if you've done 23andMe, that's still in there. You can see if you have 0, 1, or 2 variants. You can then type that into the Retain Your Brain software, and then it'll give you, in part, a targeted plan. So you can talk to your doctor about APOE. There's commercial testing out there. But yeah, genes are not our destiny. We can win the tug of war against your genes, quoting Max Luger. Who said that first? Was that me or you? Because I quote you, but you quote my... Did you say that first?
That's I don't I don't recall. That was back in the day, probably something that came out spur of the moment on one of our
Yeah.
on our TV episodes. Yeah.
We'll take equal credit. Great. Thanks, Max.